Now, one of the first things I tell each group is this. Whatever I say is a concept. It is not the truth. I say this in the beginning because I dare say what I say will appeal to you. And every 5-10 seconds, your brain will say, or your mind will say, this appeals to me. But how do I know it's the truth? So I tell you first, it is not the truth. It is only a concept. What do I mean by a concept? A concept is something which some people may accept, some people may deny. Anything wrong, Haina? Oh, yeah, I see. The other thing about a concept is that it can be interpreted in 2 ways or more ways. Let me give you an example. There is a story of a king's dream. The king dreamt that all his teeth had fallen out. So he called for the astrologer, the court astrologer. The court astrologer interpreted the dream as saying, Your Majesty, this is a very bad dream. This says all your relatives will die soon. The king was angry. He sent him to prison. And he sent for another astrologer. This astrologer, knowing what happened to the first astrologer, said, Majesty, this is a very good omen. This says that you will outlive all your relatives. So the same concept can be interpreted in 2 ways. There is another story of 2 students in a seminary studying religion. Both were supposed to pray for a minimum length of time. Both liked to smoke. And they didn't know what to do. So they both decided they would go to their immediate counselor or superior and get his advice. Next morning, the first one came and said, Oh no, I'm not allowed to smoke. The other one said, Really? I'm allowed to smoke. So the second one said, what did you ask your counselor? So he said, I asked him, May I smoke when I pray? So he said, Certainly not. But I asked my counselor, May I pray when I smoke? And he said, Of course. So the same concept is capable of different interpretation. The same event happens. One is good for someone, not so good for another one. About this also there is a joke. A man got among a group of friends, one man got into the habit of saying, it could have been worse. Every time something happened, almost certainly he would say it could have been worse. One morning, a friend came and said, Do you know what happened last night? Fred went home unexpectedly, found his wife in bed with a friend, and he shot them both. And now Fred is in jail. So this man said, Oh, that's very bad. That's most unfortunate. Then he added, It could have been worse. This time, the friend was angry. He said, What do you mean? One friend is in jail, his wife and another person are dead? He said, Well, it's this way. This happened last night. If it had happened the previous night, I would have been dead. So a concept is something which can be interpreted. Therefore I say, whatever I say is a concept. It is not the truth. So is there something which is the truth, which goes beyond mind, which goes beyond interpretation? Yes, there is, which no one can deny. And that is the impersonal awareness of existence. I am, I exist. That impersonal awareness of existence is in every human being. No one will deny that he exists. An atheist may deny that God exists, but he cannot deny that he exists. So this impersonal awareness of existence, I am, is the only truth. And that truth prevails in phenomenality, in life as we know it. Beyond life, or prior to life, prior to the manifestation arising from the source, consciousness at rest becomes consciousness in movement as manifestation. Or potential energy becomes activized energy as manifestation, because it is the nature of potential to activize itself sometime. Otherwise, it wouldn't be potential. So, in the unmanifest or the potential state, or when consciousness at rest, there is no question to be raised by anyone about truth or untruth. The source is not concerned with truth. The source is the truth. So the truth is only concerned with phenomenality or life. So, when a spiritual seeker wants to know the truth, he assumes that it must be beyond life or prior to life. And therefore, the misconception often is that the seeking, the spiritual seeking, must transcend life. My concept is exactly the other way around. Any spiritual concept which does not refer to life as we know it will not be much good. So the spiritual truth that you are seeking has to refer to life as we know it. So my first concept is that I am is the only truth, and I am is life as we know it, or the functioning of manifestation. So, the second basic concept is that the human being is one species of objects along with thousands of species of objects on land, air and water, which together constitute the totality of manifestation. What is manifestation? What is the totality of manifestation? The totality of every species of object. So basically, the human being is an object. Many problems arise because that is forgotten. The human being is basically an object, according to my concept, a uniquely programmed object. Nonetheless, an object. The uniqueness of the programming by programming, let me explain. The human being had no choice in being born to particular parents. Therefore, he had no choice about the unique genes or DNA in that human object. For the same reason, he had no choice in being born in a particular environment in which that object has been receiving conditioning from day one. So the unique DNA plus the environmental conditioning is the programming in that object. A Pulitzer Prize winner has said it in a picturesque way. He says, there is a mechanism in the human machine, in the human mechanism. There is a mechanism in the human mechanism which prevents the human mechanism from seeing its mechanistic nature. I repeat, he says, in the human mechanism, there is a mechanism which prevents the human mechanism from seeing its mechanistic nature. And that mechanism is generally known in the spiritual seeking as the ego. Now, where did the ego come from? And every teaching tells you that the ego is a problem, that you have to kill the ego. So the real question is, where did the ego come from? The ego could not have come from anywhere other than the source. Where could the ego, where could anything have come from except from the source? So the source created the ego. Why did the source create the ego? My concept is that it is the egos, the interrelationships from the various egos, which produce interhuman relationships. And it is the interhuman relationships which is the basis of life as we know it. So for life as we know it to happen, Leela as it is known, or the game of God, interhuman relationships have to happen. And for interhuman relationships to happen, the ego has to be created, which is the mechanism which prevents the human mechanism from seeing its mechanistic nature. It is the ego, the individual thinker, the individual doer, the individual experiencer, who says, I think, I do, I experience, forgetting the mechanistic nature of the human body-mind organs. The spiritual seeking has begun the moment the source, incidentally you may call the source by whatever name that appeals to you. You can say consciousness, you can say source, or you can say God. But when I use the word God, I use it for the source, not an entity, an all-powerful entity connected with the manifestation. If I use the word God, please try to remember, I do not mean an all-powerful entity. That entity has been created by the mind. The human being, quite early, having recognized its helplessness in life, has created God as an all-powerful entity in the manifestation to whom he or she can pray for whatever he or she wants. And he gave that entity attributes. all-knowing, all-powerful, all-merciful. So it is the human mind which gives the attribute all-merciful to God and then asks God, why, O all-merciful God, why have you created disease and wars? So it is not this entity that I refer to when I use the word God, I mean the source. So the source had to create the ego so that life could go on. And the source at the same time started the process of destroying the ego in a limited number of cases. How limited? The Bhagavad Gita says, among thousands of people, there is one seeker, and among all the many seekers, there is hardly one who knows me in principle. So, the source created the ego, and the source started the process of destroying the ego. So, seeking, spiritual seeking, was started at the same time the ego was created. Again, my concept is this. This spiritual seeking is an extraordinarily unique seeking. In an ordinary seeking, in phenomenality, the seeking stops only when the seeker finds the object of his seeking. I repeat, in any ordinary seeking in phenomenality, the seeking can only stop when the seeker gets what he wanted. In the spiritual seeking, I think the seeking stops the moment the seeker truly understands what he is seeking. I repeat, in the spiritual seeking, the seeking stops the moment the seeker truly understands what it is that he is seeking. The rest of the process is purely spontaneous and has nothing to do with the seeker. What does the seeker, spiritual seeker, really want? He doesn't know. In Bombay, when people come to see me, I ask this regular question. And they usually no answer. Or they say, that is why I have come to you. There is great confusion. There is confusion about what I am seeking. Or there is an answer, something picked up from some book or some answer. I want to be one with the oneness. I want to know the oneness. I want to be one with the source. And if the source is all there is, if consciousness is all there is, who is this who wants to be one with consciousness? And the seeking stops the moment this is understood, that there never has been a seeker. There never has been a seeker. There never has been a thinker. There never has been a doer of any kind. And there has never been an experiencer. Thinking happens, doing happens, experiencing happens. as a matter of the source functioning through every human being. Every action that is produced every moment through every one of the billions of human beings is an action produced by the source through the respective body-mind organisms which have been uniquely programmed for that particular action of that particular moment to happen. In other words, what I'm saying is, no action is an individual's action. It's an action produced by the source, specifically at that time, at that moment, through that specific body-mind organism. And for that to happen, the source has created the human being with the unique programming so that that particular action at that moment would happen. And the totality of actions through the billions of human beings, through the billions of human programmed objects, is the totality of what is at the moment. So what is at the moment, if what is at the moment is accepted as the will of God, as something which the source has produced, then there is no happiness or unhappiness. Happiness or unhappiness arises because the ego does not accept what is and wants something different from what is at the moment. It is the ego. So it is the ego which wants something different from what is. And that is why the unhappiness. So what the human being is seeking really is something that will give him happiness beyond anything that life can give him. That is why the misconception arises that the human being seeks something which transcends life. It's a gross, total misconception. Whatever transcends life is only the source. And the source is not concerned either with the truth or with happiness. So the first thing that the seeker has to find out is whether he is seeking anything. Did the seeker start the seeking at a particular time? The apparent reason may be there. Or did the seeking happen? And in every case, it will be found that the seeking was beyond the control of the seeker. For every young person, and you'll be astonished how many persons have said, when did the seeking begin? When did you start seeking spiritually? The amazing answer is, they start with say 20 years, 30 years. No, maybe sooner. And then the answer is, as far back as I can remember. So as far back as I can remember, the meaning is, the seeking began. So my second question to the visitor is, if the seeking began at an age when most children were seeking something else, why do you suppose this kind of unusual seeking happened through this particular body-mind organism? The answer is simple. That kind of seeking happened because that kind of programming was in that body-mind organism, which enabled that seeking to happen. In other words, what I'm saying is this: ever since a baby is born and seeks its mother's breast intuitively, life has been nothing but seeking. What kind of seeking? Depends on the unique programming in that body-mind organism where the seeking happens. Therefore, you find people seeking money. You find people seeking fame. You find people seeking power. And you find people seeking God, or the source, or the truth. And the choice of the seeking is not with the individual. That kind of seeking happens for which that body-mind organism has been uniquely programmed. So in the spiritual seeking, there are basically two kinds of processes. One is known as bhakti or devotion. The other kind is known as knowledge or jnana. And usually it is said, even Ramana Maharshi says, there are two paths leading to the same goal. And there is a third one, which is called the karma marga, which is social service. And the one who is successful in that kind of path is usually one who has been programmed for that. But someone who is programmed for devotion is told by someone about jnana, and he is, for circumstances, force him to take the line of the path of jnana, there will be conflict. And if the conflict happens, it could not have happened unless it is the will of God. Therefore, if the seeking takes the particular path for which that body-mind organism has been programmed, it is part of the will of God. In other words, the third basic condition, the third basic concept I have is, even the spiritual seeking happens in phenomenality, in life as we know it. And in life as we know it, my basic concept is contained in 4 simple words: thy will be done. In other words, nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. And if something has happened, it could not have happened without the will of God, unless it was the will of God. And what has happened, the human being decides whether it is good or bad. And when the human being decides something is good or bad, it is from the point of view of the human race. What is good or bad starts with the individual. This is good for me. Then this is good for my family. This is good for my community. This is good for my state. Then this is good for my country. And this circle expands as the ego becomes more and more magnanimous. The ego says, what I am trying to do is for the entire human race. And the entire human race in the earth is just a small dot in the totality of the universe. So the human being is restricted in his thinking to what is good for himself individually expanding gradually to the human race. So the smallpox germ has been eliminated. Wonderful for the human race. But what about the smallpox germ, which is also part of the existence in the universe? So what happens where is judged by the human mind only in a very, very restricted way. And therefore, the human being wants to know why God has done this or why has God done that. Why did God have to produce a Hitler? The simplest answer, of course, is why not? You can't restrict the power of the source. But the real answer to that is, as Ramana Maharshi's question, who am I? The basic self-inquiry. Who wants to know? The one who wants to know is a created object wanting to know the will of the Creator's subjectivity, which is impossible. Something known, something wanted to be known is based on the triad of the knower subject, the known object, and the process of knowing. So, for any knowledge to happen, for any meeting to happen, there have to be two, the subject and the object. And when the created object, the human being, wants to know the will of God, what has actually happened is that the created object has usurped the subjectivity of the pure subject, and what is worse, turned the pure subjectivity into an object which the pseudo-subject wants to know, which according to my concept is perhaps what could be called the original truth, the original sin. A created object usurping the subjectivity of the pure subject and turning the pure subjectivity into an object which the created object wants to know. And therefore, the scientist is what this is what the scientist is doing. The scientist can succeed only where the how of the manifest is concerned, even that to a limited degree. But he can never know the why. That is why the German mystic has so clearly pointed out the human being can only wonder and marvel at the magnificence of God's creation. He cannot do anything more than that. In other words, all that the human being can do is accept the mystery that is the universe. He cannot attempt to solve the mystery. So at the acceptance of God's will is the final objective in the spiritual seeking. And that is not in the control. If the individual is so programmed for spiritual seeking that there is enormous receptivity, then the first time this concept is put before that body-mind organism, it will go straight to the heart, of course. How else can it be? But if that kind of receptivity is usually not there, there is a certain resistance. Therefore, the basic concept, thy will be done, which is common to every single religion, and is yet not deeply accepted. Only lip service is done to the divine. Thy will be done. but no one, hardly anyone, truly accepts it. So how can it be? So the final search, as I say, the seeking stops when the ego realizes what it is that he has been seeking. And when the ego realizes that what he has been seeking, the seeking stops. Now, what is it exactly that the ego is seeking, and which the ego has to know? That is based on thy will be done. Meaning, the individual free will does not prevail. And that is the experience of everyone. Perhaps in the case of very, very few, it may have happened that they have wanted something, they have worked hard for it, and they've got it. So, in that case, that particular body-mind organism thinks he is in control. But even in such a case, there are scores of incidents where it is quite clear that his life was not in his control. So the final thing that ego has to come to the conclusion is that all thinking, all doing, all experiencing happens through the body-mind organism as the functioning of consciousness. In other words, it is consciousness which functions through every human being, every human body-mind organism, and producing actions at that moment, strictly according to the will of God, based on the programming in each human object. That is my basic concept. And this, the ego has to come to the conclusion. The ego himself or herself has to come to this conclusion. How does he do that? Only from personal experience. So the only thing that the ego really has to do in this spiritual search, the word sadhana is usually used. So I would say the only sadhana, according to my concept, is for the ego to find out from personal experience whether any action, I repeat, any action at any time has been his or her action. And I dare say an honest investigation will make it clear to every ego that no action that has happened has been his or her action, from personal experience. How does an action happen? Any action that happens because the source uses the programmed human instrument, the programmed human computer, to bring out an action strictly the way you use your computer. How do you use your computer? You put in an input. The programmed computer has no choice but to bring out an output strictly according to the programming. But there being no ego in the computer doesn't say the output is my action. So the ego has to find out personally from personal experience. And the process which I suggest is this. At the end of each day, sit back for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. select a number of actions which have happened that day, any simple or complicated action. Find out whether that has been my action or has it been really an event that has happened, an output that has happened over which I had no control. So what is the input which the source or God puts in? A thought comes to a human being. He's so used to saying the word my. He says, it's my thought. But basically, from personal experience, the human being has no control over what thought will come next. So the next thought that comes is the input, the divine input. Or same thing happens, something seen or heard or tasted or smelt or touched, any of the action. The human being truly has no control over what will be seen or heard or what thought is going to come next. That is the input. The brain reacts to that input strictly according to the programming, and the output that comes out is what the human being says, my action or my reaction. So something is seen by three different people with three different programmings. Same action is seen, same event is seen. The brain would react to that, and the reaction, the output, could be anger in one case, compassion in the other case, or fear in the third case. And the same three things would happen even in the case of three sages. Because even in the case of a sage, the body-mind organism remains with more or less the same programming. So the three body-mind organisms through which three different reactions have arisen could be either ordinary person or a sage. The difference between the ordinary person and the sage is simply this. The sage does not react to the natural reaction because the ego is dead. The ordinary man's ego reacts to that output and gets involved. So the distinction between an ordinary person and a sage, according to my concept, is merely this. The ordinary person reacts to the natural reaction of the computer. So the ordinary person says, I am angry. What has happened has made me angry. Therefore, what has happened, whoever is in control must exercise more control, do something about it, so that things which happen, things like this will not happen. Or he will also say, I am angry. I shouldn't be angry. My doctor has warned me against being angry. My blood pressure rises. All that is the involvement of the ego to the output brought about by the source or God. Anger in one case. In the other case, compassion. So compassion has arisen because that body-mind organism was programmed. So the ordinary man says, having reacted to that output, to compassion, by giving some money or help to someone, whoever needed it, the involvement is, the ego says, I am a kind and compassionate person. I hope God makes a note of it. Fear arises. The ordinary person says, what I have seen has made me afraid. I shouldn't be afraid. My friend is not afraid. I am a timid man. That is the involvement of the ego. In the case of a sage, anger arises, takes its course. Compassion arises, takes its course. fear arises and is witnessed. There is no involvement of the ego in the case of a sage, because the basis of being a sage is that the ego has been destroyed. So how does the ego get destroyed? Ramana Maharshi calls this method self-inquiry, and he says that is the direct method. Who am I? That query, that self-inquiry, has been translated by me into a more detailed inquiry. Who is this me? Who is this me who, from personal experience, is found not to be doing anything? If at the end of the inquiry and investigation from personal experience, the conclusion is, no action of mine today has been my action. And if day after day this investigation happens, and the conclusion is, no action has been my action, then the ego himself asks the question, if no action is my action, who is this me? Is there a me at all? If there is no me at all, what am I seeking? So the spiritual seeking takes a more definite turn. So the spiritual seeker seeks in the beginning something more than what life has afforded him. But after life, the ego is no longer concerned. So what the seeker really seeks is known to him. The seeker knows what he wants without specifically being able to locate it. So I suggest to the visitor, what you think you have been seeking, you have already known, or more accurately, has been known, has been experienced. But in that knowledge, in that experience, there was no me, which is in deep sleep. No human being can want anything more passionately, more earnestly than deep sleep. Because in that deep sleep, state of deep sleep, exists that which is closest to the source, which is peace, which is not happiness in duality, which is not happiness connected with unhappiness. So the peace which prevails in deep sleep is what the seeker has been spiritually seeking and not known. So when the seeker comes to know that what he really has been seeking has already been happening, and in that happening of peace in deep sleep, the basis of that condition being there, the basis of peace in deep sleep is the absence of the me wanting peace. I repeat, the seeker comes to the conclusion that the peace that is in deep sleep is what he has been wanting. And that peace in deep sleep happens because in deep sleep the ego is not present. So, for that kind of peace to happen in the waking state, in daily life, while the ego thinks he is doing whatever he is doing, whereas in fact what is actually happening is, whatever is happening through any body-mind organism is the functioning of the source or God through each body-mind organism and producing whatever was supposed to be produced. Exactly like electricity functions through all electrical gadgets and produces only that for which that particular electrical gadget has been designed. And that is exactly what happens in the case of a human being. The source or God functions through each body-mind organism and produces only that at that moment which is supposed to be produced, for which that body-mind organism has been programmed. So I come back to my basic principle, basic concept. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of God. And the will of God for each individual human object is what may be called the destiny of that object. Stamped again as my concept at the moment of conception. So if it is God's will that a particular conception should not be born, that conception will be aborted. So the destiny of that conception is not to be born, therefore that conception will be aborted. But if it is God's will and the destiny of a conception to be born, then the object that is born and the span of life that is allotted to that object, strictly according to the will of God, is the destiny of that object which is born, to live for a particular span of life. And what happens during that span of life, every split second, is again the will of God and the destiny of that object. At this stage, the mind intellect wants to know, on what basis does God decide whether a conception will be aborted or whether it will live for a particular span of life, and what is going to happen to that during that span of life. The mind intellect, the ego, wants to know. And the question has already been answered. A created object can never know the will of God. All we can do is accept the will of God. So the seeker stops seeking when he comes to the conclusion that there never was a seeker, that there was never a doer of any action. So this understanding that there is no doer of any action, therefore there never has been a me, is first an intellectual understanding. That is when the seeking really stops. Even with the intellectual understanding that there is truly no me, and that understanding is the result of a personal experience of the me not being a doer. The subsequent process of the intellectual understanding going deeper into the heart is a matter of spontaneity, a matter of the will of God, and a matter of the destiny of that body-mind organism. But the understanding is that there is no action which is done by me, which means the me cannot proceed with the further process of enlightenment or self-realization. That's why I say this is a unique seeking. Spiritual seeking is unique in the sense that the seeking stops the moment the seeker really comes to know what it is he is seeking. And what is it that he is seeking? Its own annihilation. What is the ego seeking? Even the intellectual understanding is the ego is truly seeking its own annihilation. And that is why the seeking stops there. But the intellectual understanding going deeper into the heart and becoming an unconditional acceptance is self-realization. That there is truly no me. There is truly no me doing anything in this body-mind organism. More importantly, there is no me doing anything through this body-mind organism, which is more important. The understanding that no action is my action. Something good happens, somebody appreciates, money comes in for an action which has happened through this body-mind organism, then that happening, fame or money, is an input into this body-mind organism. The brain reacts to that input with an output of a sense of pleasure. There is a sense of pleasure. It's not that the sage does not have a sense of pleasure. If a sage is hungry and he has a good meal, no sage will say that there has not been a sense of pleasure, satisfaction, fulfillment. That does happen. Sense of pleasure arises. But what does not arise? Because of the annihilation of the ego, with the total acceptance that no action is my action, sense of pleasure may arise. But what does not arise? What does not arise is pride, knowing that it is that action was not my action. Pride does not arise. On the other hand, something not so good happens, and the society accepts that as not so good, then a sense of displeasure or regret or even compassion for itself may arise. But what will not arise? What will not arise with the knowledge that that action was not my action? Sense of guilt will not arise. Sense of displeasure, yes, but not guilt. That is as far as actions which happen through this body-mind. More important, as I say, is the understanding, total unconditional acceptance, that no action which happens through anyone else is his or her action. Now, if an action which happens through some other body-mind organism hurts me, hurts this body-mind organism, then that hurt will happen. Why will that hurt happen in this body-mind organism? Because it is God's will. Because it is the destiny of this body-mind organism to be hurt at that time. The hurt will happen, and the hurt will be accepted as the destiny of this body-mind organism. But what will not arise? Knowing that that action was not anyone's action. What will not arise is hate or envy. So, the total acceptance that no action is my action means, in spite of an immediate reaction of pleasure or displeasure, pride or guilt will not arise. And more important, hate or envy will not arise for other people, which is really the basis of the peace which exists in the waking state while the body-mind object is going through its normal paces, normal life. The basis of that peace is exactly the basis of the peace in deep sleep. The only difference is this. In deep sleep, there was no manifestation to be witnessed. In daily life, there is manifestation happening, events happening. They are merely witnessed. In what way? In the words of Buddha, Lord Buddha, events happen, deeds are done, but there is no individual doer thereof. Therefore, in the deep sleep state, no manifestation, no functioning of manifestation, no events happening. Therefore, there is nothing to be witnessed. In the waking state, in the active state, functioning happens, events happen, deeds are done. They are merely witnessed as no one's deeds. So the same peace which prevails in deep sleep prevails in the waking state, with only one difference. In the deep sleep there is no witnessing. In the waking state there is witnessing. But that witnessing is impersonal witnessing. There is no individual witnessor witnessing whatever happens, judging it as something good for me or not, and then becoming happy or unhappy. So the first thing that the seeker realizes is that what he is really seeking for is that peace which prevails in deep sleep, and that the basis of that peace is the absence of the ego as the me. So the conclusion that the seeker comes to, even at an intellectual level, is that the basis of the peace is the annihilation of the ego. And at that point, the seeking, as I said, stops. The seeking stops not by getting the peace that is wanted, but with the mere acceptance of the fact that there is no doer, no seeker. The seeking stops merely with the understanding of what is wanted. The subsequent process, as I say, the deepening of the process, the deepening of the understanding which has come from personal experience, that no action is my action, goes deeper to the unconditional total acceptance, which I think means enlightenment or self-realization. The total unconditional acceptance. No action is my action. Any questions or comments? Maybe tomorrow.
Ramesh, I thought I heard you say. Yes?
No, please.
Sorry.
Go. My hand is against the light.
I thought I heard you say that when the seeker,
Yes.
the ego is not there anymore, what happens to this, at that point, the sage, is a matter of spontaneity, destiny, and divine will.
Yes.
Can you distinguish between spontaneity at that point and destiny?
No, you mean at what stage does the final acceptance happen? At what point does the sage come into being? Is that what you're asking?
No, I thought you had explained manifestation in terms of a mechanistic view of destiny.
Yes.
But then you added spontaneity as something that happens for the enlightened being. Are they different? That's what I thought I heard that. There was a what happens is a matter, you said, of spontaneity, divine will, and destiny.
Yes. Which means there is no individual concerned anymore with the happening. There is no individual concerned with any event. What the event does to the body-mind object is accepted as God's will and the destiny of this body-mind object. You see, now, until last year, there was a body-mind organism called Mother Teresa, so programmed that only what were known as good deeds happened. So the happening of the good deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism, because that body-mind organism was programmed and destined to produce those deeds. So the happening of the good deeds was the destiny of that body-mind organism. And the consequences, Nobel Prize, awards, rewards, was also the destiny of the same body-mind organism. That is at one extreme. And life as we know it is based on duality, on interconnected opposites, polarity. So the other extreme, there is a body-mind organism which is so programmed that only evil acts happen. So the happening of the evil acts is the destiny of that body-mind organism. And the consequences of those acts, the body-mind organism being executed or put in jail or an asylum, is also the destiny of the same body-mind organism. But the point is, both body-mind organisms at the two extremes were created by the same source. I repeat, at this point, the intellect wants to know on what basis. And that is not possible because the created object can never know the will of the creator subject. Okay?
I have some problems with the
Yes.
Hello, the idea of effort and choice.
Effort and choice.
Yes.
Yes.
I think somewhere, you or Ramana said we have to live as if we did have a choice, although we don't. Have I understood that correctly?
Can you repeat that, please?
That although we have no choice.
Although we have no choice.
Yes, we have to live as if we did have a choice.
Yes. That is one way of putting it.
I have problems with that.
Yes.
Because, for instance, if I'm offered orange juice or mineral water,
Yes.
I don't say to myself, well, I will act as if I have a choice.
Now,
I, in fact, experience myself.
Let me tackle your problem for you. Will your problem disappear if I tell you that you do have a choice?
Well, that creates another problem then.
You see? So you have a free will, you have one kind of problem. You have no free will, another kind of problem.
That's
you
right.
act as if you have free will, third kind of problem.
Yes. But the whole of your teaching is based on there not being any choice.
On concept. No. Basically, my teaching is based on one thing. Nothing can happen unless it is the will of God.
So maybe it would be the right thing to say is that choice arises, that is what happens, but we are not the one who chooses.
Yes. So, the way I would put it is this. Do I have a choice? I would say, you do have a free will. You do have a choice. Now, how will you work? You do have a choice. But how does that choice work? The choice will depend on what you think you should do in given circumstances. Isn't that right?
Well, it's much more of an instinctive thing, like I will now want some tea instead of having coffee, for instance.
Yes, whatever it is, you will prefer tea to coffee or the other way around.
That's right.
Now, that choice will be based on the programming. And the programming means your unique DNA plus conditioning. Make no mistake. The choice will be based on the existing conditioning. And the existing conditioning may be that coffee is bad for you. So you will choose tea. So that your choice itself will be based on the conditioning over which you have had no control.
Yes, I accept that, but the experience is not like that. The experience is just that I am choosing.
Yes,
And
so therefore I say investigate who chooses something, why does he choose it? Because that depends, your choice has been based on conditioning. So do you have free will? Of course. You do have free will. You see? But that free will is based on the programming over which you had no control. So if you investigate this free will which you do have, I repeat, if you investigate this free will which you do have to make a choice, you will find that that free will is based on the conditioning. And therefore, it is truly not your free will. So, do I have free will? Yes. On investigation, it turns out to be counterfeit. You see, it's like finding a bundle of notes, currency notes, in the attic. Do you have a bundle of currency notes? Of course you have. You take it to the bank the next day and they say, this is counterfeit. So do you or do you not have the bundle of notes? You do. But on investigation, it turns out that that bundle of notes is counterfeit. So do you have free will? Yes. But on what is it based? On something over which I have no control. Therefore, it is counterfeit.
Okay, thank you.
Ramesh, on investigation I see that I am not the doer. But now that the ego is coming out of hiding for this time,
Yes.
what I see is, before I was skimming over, well, then there's no me. But I caught and I'm catching that there is me. And this is the ego. And it is having the idea that it is controlling. But the two things are happening together. I see that that I'm not the doer. Very clearly. That's clear.
And yet there is a me.
Yet I am seeing that now that this ego is the me. It's
Yes.
two things, a
No,
very
you see,
subtle thing happening.
Yes,
Yeah.
but what happens is this. Ramana Maharshi lived for 60 years after 50 years after self-realization. During those 50 years, if Ramana Maharshi were called by name, Bhagwan or Swami or whatever, he would have responded, would he not? So his response to a name being called means there was identification for 50 years after self-realization. Identification with a name and form. So that identification continues. That identification which says, I am hurt, I feel the pain. That me which says, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? That identification continues, but without the sense of personal doership. And this identification with a name and form which continues without the basic sense of personal doership is what Ramana Maharshi has picturesquely called the remnants of a burnt rope. A burnt rope has still the form, but it is useless. You can't tie anybody with it. And yet, that identification with a name and form is necessary with the working mind in the body-mind organism, so that that body-mind organism should be able to live out its lifespan. So that identification without the sense of doership will continue and must continue. But it is accepted as merely the functioning of God or consciousness through the body-mind organism. There is no me to be concerned, except to the extent of the identification, feeling the pain, physical or mental, physical or psychological.